Hey guys, it's Becca. I am back with a different kind of video for you today, which I hope you will enjoy. Not my usual ramble on and on, something a little different. So I have been working on a few projects recently, and I just completed my first full-on, start to finish digital painting in Photoshop. Yay! Really proud that I finished it. I will talk more about that later, but it was definitely a struggle. And I wanted to make this video because I thought it might be helpful for people to see my process. To be absolutely clear, this is not a how to do a digital painting video. It would probably fall more into the how not to do a digital painting video. In retrospect, looking back, I would do this very differently, but because this was my first digital painting, I thought you guys might like to see kind of how much of a hot mess it was, frankly, and the different trial and error, emphasis on the error that I went through to get this thing to the final point. So, very brief, before I start actually showing the different steps, I just wanted to give a little bit of a background on the actual story that it's based on. So this is my first piece of fan art actually in my life for a album that I absolutely love by Anais Mitchell, and it's called Hadestown. It actually just became a musical like earlier this month, but it started out as an album. And it is a kind of spin-off take on the Greek myth of Eurydice and Orpheus. And it's a really beautiful album. It has some great musicians on it. And this particular version takes place kind of in the, like a bit of a Great Depression era, kind of 1930s, 1920s maybe, post-apocalyptic, kind of magical scenario. It sounds crazy, but if you listen to the album, I swear you will love it. It's great for a road trip. It's a really beautiful story, and it's so creative. I so appreciate the creativity that went into this. And I selected it because it didn't have any visuals with it, so I felt like I had to rely on my own creativity to come up with how I wanted the painting to look. So, onto the process. Okay, first things first, thumbnails. I apologize for the quality of these first few images. I didn't know I was going to share them at this point, so I'm sorry there's just graphite everywhere and they are difficult to make out, but I hope you can get the idea. Basically a bunch of just really small, very loose sketches. For me, they're more just to remind me of ideas I had than to really work out any compositional elements. They're just a way to get some creative ideas moving. I did a bunch of them, and I put a little box around the one that I liked the most. It's the one with the dark black box around it. So the scene I decided to go with is the scene where the three fates are watching as Hades convinces Eurydice to join him in Hadestown. He basically promises her a much better life in Hadestown than she has on Earth with Orpheus, and she agrees to go with him. Spoiler alert, it's not better. If you know the story, you know what happens there. But this was the scene I wanted. I wanted to do some figures, and I also wanted to try something that was like a little bit more of a complex compositional concept. There's also some doodles showing how I thought about maybe portraying the fates, maybe more sort of like skeletal looking, maybe more playful, just a few different ideas for how I could do that in the painting. I also did a little detail on how I wanted to show Eurydice falling from Earth into the underworld. In this particular version of the story, Hadestown is an underground mining city, and there's this ongoing metaphor about Eurydice being a songbird because she has a beautiful voice. In this particular one, Hades is talking about wanting her to come down to the mine as a canary. In case you didn't know, little historical side note, coal miners used to bring canaries into the mines with them because birds in general have extremely weak respiratory systems, so they die from carbon monoxide poisoning or methane poisoning before it becomes dangerous for humans, so people can know when situations are dangerous and when to get out of the mine. So next one is also another kind of slight variation on the original thumbnail, as well as this very horrifying idea that I had to make the fates look like spiders. Yikes, obviously that did not make the final cut. Okay, at this point I brought the thumbnail into Photoshop and did a really sloppy general value study, as well as kind of moved things around to solidify the general placement of things and the composition. Next, I basically did a digital version of the compositional layout and a value study. Slightly tighter, but still very loose and rather non-committal with where things were going to go and what things were going to look like. At this point, I was kind of venturing into unknown territory with color, and it shows. I tried this color study, I spent some time on it, and basically couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. I knew it wasn't cohesive, and I knew the colors were not looking great together, but I also didn't really know how to fix it. So instead of belabor this, which my tendency would be to do, I just decided to move on and hope for the best, because I basically hit a wall with this and couldn't figure out how to fix it. I did know that I wanted Eurydice to be yellow because of the canary reference. Okay, I know, this is looking terrifying. Do not give up on me now. Hang with me. This was probably the most helpful thing that I did for the whole piece, and helped me most in respect to efficiency. It definitely would have been worth the time to set up a light and take better reference photos, but unfortunately I did this at night with a flash, so I was able to use it for the anatomical references, but had to do a lot of the lighting guesswork myself, and that ended up taking a lot of time down the line. Surprise! I can imagine you probably weren't expecting this as the next step, and with good reason. Basically, I had to backtrack because after the last step, I panicked and just did not know what to do next. Again, just another roadblock. The last 5 steps, if you saw them in next to each other, are very non-committal, and I realized at this point that I never actually nailed down the details of the piece, what the characters were going to look like, the composition, the different elements. So I had to actually go back kind of to step 2 and redo this drawing where I really committed to my lines and decided what the final look of it was going to be. I did this on paper because I'm just not comfortable enough to do this on my tablet. Okay, back in Photoshop. I adjusted the layout slightly to fit the correct canvas size and started blocking in the colors. Again, I feel like a broken record, but once again, I got to this point and I didn't know what to do next. This was, I have to say, probably the lowest point in the process because I had already put in a lot of time and I just felt so lost and so anxious, and I wanted to quit because I felt like if I don't know what to do now, I'm probably not ready to do this. It was not the best day, I have to admit. So, because I couldn't think of anything to do, I just decided to clarify the outline of things. I went in and basically outlined the original drawing that I had set up over top of the color blocks that I had put in. To be honest, I'm pretty sure this step was entirely unnecessary, but at least it kept me moving and it kept me from feeling like I was just staring at the screen doing nothing. Luckily, things really started to look up in this next phase, thankfully. I decided on a kind of a gut instinct to just go in and render one of the faces. I'm not really sure this was very efficient, and it's probably not the order I would do things in the future, but it did give me a lot of confidence, which I really needed at that point to feel like I could move this into some next phase, I guess. Another thing I did at this point, which was really helpful, was commit to using a few specific brushes as well as a very specific blending technique. Originally, I was just grabbing one of the 5 bazillion Photoshop brushes that I had, and then I couldn't find the brushes again, and it was like a yard sale of brushes, blending techniques. I was just doing whatever. So I ended up buying a plugin called Brushbox, which is amazing. Definitely check it out. And it helped me favorite a few brushes, and then I stuck with those for the rest of the painting, and it made it much easier. I had to make fewer decisions, and I just kind of had a consistent workflow based off of these 6 brushes, blenders, erasers that I had selected. All right, now I have the second face in there, and I did it based on the first face using the same brushes, the same techniques. You can see I'm still kind of fiddling around with the colors, sort of non-committal there, but adding in little details here and there throughout. In terms of technique for all of this, in case you're curious, I was basically using a hard round brush and then using a smudge tool to smooth out and soften edges if need be. If you look at the bottom hand on the right, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. I basically put in the values, and then when I felt like the value structure was correct, I went in and smoothed out edges, softened edges, or left them hard depending on what kind of an edge it was. I also realized at this point that I had a compositional problem, which probably should have resolved earlier. But basically I realized it was sort of unclear what was happening in the middle of the scene and how the background was transitioning into the foreground. So at this point I'm trying to figure out what the heck I can do to make this look interesting and not awkward. So still, that area wasn't really working here. So you may have noticed this before, but I am jumping around a lot as I work on this, moving from different characters, foreground, background, touching up things here and there. Not probably the most efficient way to do this, and also kind of stressful because the farther you get in the process, the more difficult it is to make changes. So I really wish I had clarified the value structure and the composition before I had started working on the details, because it came back to bite me at this point. So we're getting much closer here, closing in on it. You can see there's some more modeling and refinement in the characters, adding some lighting effects and really trying to kind of polish this up and make it look vibrant and have all the different characters and items separate from each other and the hierarchy correct. And with this one, I was finally working on the last character. At this point, I was just pretty much over it, but I knew that this was an important part of it because it's right in the middle, so I did give it my best effort to have it look as natural as possible. And finally, the last step, I brightened up the whole thing, added some little lighting effects, and did a color overlay to bring the whole thing together. So that's it. That's the whole painting. I was gonna make a big list of takeaways, and there are a lot of little things like get better photo reference and make sure you finish the composition before you start the details. But a lot of those things are kind of no-brainers and maybe things that I just couldn't figure out how to avoid in this level of skill that I'm at right now. But I will say that for me, the biggest takeaway from this and the hardest and most important part of it was just that I keep pushing forward even when I wasn't feeling confident with the next step or what I needed to do to improve my piece. I think there's a time for studying/learning, and there's a time for doing what you can with the skills that you have at any given moment. And the perfectionist side of you always is gonna know that there's a better way to do something, that you're not doing it the best way or the most efficient way or the most attractive way possible. But if you let that side of your brain run the show, you never finish anything. So I know, at least for me, my intentions are very good when I get derailed on these processes, in that I want to, for example, know how to draw a bird feather better, or how to render hair, or what does a lighting on a cliff look like. But you have to push through those things and just work with what you have, otherwise you'll never finish anything. So for me, it was painful. It was agonizing to push through and finish things knowing that they weren't right or they weren't perfect. But in the end, that was the only way I was actually going to finish this. And I'm very proud that I finished it. I also don't really like looking at it at this point because I can see all the errors with it, but I think now I have a very good idea of what I need to study next, and I can be intentional and thoughtful about where I focus my energies. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.